Hello, how are you today? I'm AJ Fisher, creator of the hypoxics method, the breathography technique, the ab ribbon, all of the things, and today we're going to talk about why I still cue a pelvic floor contraction in conjunction with functional movement. I know this is a highly debated topic in the industry right now, and I still cue a concentric, meaningful, intentional pelvic floor contraction with our functional movement patterns and especially in conjunction with our exhalation. If you want to learn more about my methodology, the breathography technique, which does utilize strengthening intentionally of the pelvic floor in conjunction with breath cycle, please visit hypoxics.fitness for the free community. That's where the lab happens, the nerd community. It's awesome. And hypoxics.studio is where we are doing our classes, live classes and on demand. So please join me there. Additionally, like, subscribe, and share this video because as you know, as a YouTube user, if you do that, that will help me to create more of this content and I'm very passionate about it. Reason number one that I cue a pelvic floor contraction in conjunction with the exhale, well, that is the natural movement of the pelvic floor when you exhale. When you exhale, your diaphragm, your main breathing muscle, rises, and so does your pelvic floor. By actively adding in an extra squeeze, it's like strengthening your bicep. We're shortening the pelvic floor, we're increasing the amount of blood flow to the muscle, and we are getting a full contraction. And a full contraction is just as important as a full release. Now, I know that there's a lot of debate in the community right now as to whether or not we should be performing a tight squeeze with the pelvic floor. Now, if you're a person who can't feel the difference between a full contraction and a full release, or you're in a chronic state of spasm or a chronic state of squeezing, then you may need to uncouple that pelvic floor contraction as a therapy protocol, before you get back into adding in that pelvic floor contraction with the exhalation. In my breathing technique breathography, I cue a lift and a squeeze of the pelvic floor in conjunction with the exhalation in order to maximize blood flow, which, as many of us know, by increasing blood flow or perfusion to the muscle tissue, it's going to become more metabolically active and you are going to achieve more positive results in the end. It's kind of like blood flow to the brain, cerebral blood flow. The more blood flow, the more positive adaptations, because blood flow is oxygen, it's nutrients, it's good. It is a catalyst for positive change. Secondarily, by contracting the pelvic floor, you are also increasing activation of your transversus abdominis. A lot of research has shown this. When we lift the pelvic floor, you're increasing the amount of low abdominal, but specifically your deep abdominals, your transversus abdominis, as you contract your pelvic floor. Now, why is that important? Because the transversus abdominis contraction has been shown to reduce lower back pain when it increases in strength. Now, if we can increase the amount of activation of that transversus abdominis, that's why I'm wearing my ab ribbon today, because when I contract my transversus abdominis, I'm loosening the ab ribbon around my waist. And so that is going to help stabilize my lower back and help to more evenly distribute the forces through my trunk and through my pelvis when I'm exercising. So if I throw a barbell on my shoulders, if I can get more contraction in the transversus abdominis and also my obliques, which a lot of research has shown that contraction of the pelvic floor increases the contraction of the transversus abdominis, and then the exhale helps to increase activation of the oblique musculature. Think about it. Now your muscles are working synergistically. So the muscles in the front are working synergistically with the muscles in the back, the core muscles in the back, such as the erector spine, spinae muscle, which are those big, thick cables around the spine in the back. If we don't get a proper contraction in our deep core in the front, we are asking our muscles in the back and our posterior chain to support the load. Now, that's fine for a certain amount of time, but look at the cables on a bridge. You want all those cables to be working synergistically so that they have harmony with one another, and each one of those cables are less likely to break or get overused because more force is being placed on each of those cables if one of the other cables breaks and is not assisting all of the other cables. They need to work in harmony, and the muscles are no different. The pulleys of the muscle, even the static nature of the muscles, it's no different. Our body is meant to work as a unit. Now, if we can increase the activation of our core by getting a pelvic floor lift and getting a transversus abdominis contraction and getting an internal oblique and external oblique contraction with an exhale, and it's assisted and the pelvic floor contraction can serve as a catalyst, then why not? We are just strengthening all the cables of that bridge to work synergistically together. So each one of them is less likely to break, to experience muscle spasms because it's being overused, all the things. Why not teach our body to work synergistically, and especially when extra resistance or load is placed on the body? Now, some people think that pelvic floor strengthening is only meant for postnatal women because postnatal women have experienced some trauma on the area because they have carried 50, 60, 100 pounds or whatever extra weight bearing down on their pelvic floor for 9 months approximately, some more, some less. And then the giving birth, obviously, is generally tearing or doing some kind of damage to the area. And so we need those pelvic floor exercises after giving birth. Yes, so essential for postnatal women. Of course, we need to increase blood flow and neuromuscular mind-body connection to the area after giving birth because it has experienced an injury. Just like when you sprain your ankle, what do you have to do? You got to go to physical therapy and you got to work it through its full range of motion. You need to contract and release all the muscles that connect into the ankle in order to not have problems in the future, and the pelvic floor is no different. Now, pelvic floor training is not only for postnatal women. All of us experience the weight of gravity on the pelvic floor as we age, and many studies have shown that the pelvic floor does weaken over time, even for those who have not given birth. And this is men and women over time. And so we want to add in specific pelvic floor strengthening exercises into our program. Now, the Kegel, that's another highly debated topic. Should we Kegel? Should we not Kegel? How long should we hold it for? Should we do it fast? Should we do it slow? Should we do it in conjunction with functional movement? Should we not? I still stand solid in my argument that adding in a pelvic floor contraction to our functional movement aids in increasing the strength and the awareness of the pelvic floor. Now, my preferred method of training core is with functional movement. Firstly, because we're creating a synergistic environment. Think of those cables on the bridge again. So all of our muscles are working together while we're performing the functional movement pattern, and therefore decreasing the load on just a few muscles to support the bar on the shoulders, or the weight, the resistance of doing a push-up or a pulling exercise. But then also, it helps to increase the efficacy and the efficiency, especially, of our functional movement sessions, so that we can train our core when in the standing position, doing functional, pushing the door open, pulling the door open, grabbing a bag of groceries, as we train our core to a high degree. And if anyone's interested in these studies that show that a forced exhalation or controlled breathing or a pelvic floor contraction or transversus abdominis or whatever you want, I have all of the studies to support this. I'm very creative in my thinking, and sometimes I do push the envelope a little bit, but I'm very passionate about being as evidence-based as possible when making these grand statements about strengthening your core. And now many of us only have 30 or 60 minutes a day, maybe not even that, to exercise, and really we're seeing in the literature that we should be exercising more. Many of us are stuck at a desk and we're not getting blood flow through our body, and therefore it's affecting our mental and our physical state. So to ask someone to do an isolated core session and also a breathwork session and also a total body session is absolutely insane. Like, I can't ask someone to do 90 minutes or 2 hours of an exercise session every single day. And so that's another reason why I encourage you to focus on your core while training the functional movements, because then you can get a 30-minute session in that trains your core by focusing on your breathing, focusing on your pelvic floor contraction, lessening your risk for injury while you're doing those squats, while you're doing those lunges and things like that. Now, there also is some argument in the industry as to, and trust me, I'm not saying that my opinion is better. This is just my perspective, and I actually would be very open to debate, and I would love to even, be proved wrong about this, because I have a study running right now. I am also an exercise scientist on top of, being a creative thinker and all of that. So I'm very open to this, but The other argument is that the pelvic floor contraction limits the ability to take a maximum inhalation. Now, I perform an engaged inhalation, which is with the pelvic floor contracted, and also a released exhalation. Why do I do that? Watch. When I take a huge maximum exhalation, my ribs move into internal rotation. The ability to externally rotate flared ribs and internally rotate the ribs, that is rib mobility, and I want you to be able to do that. Now, in the engaged inhalation, I'm doing that on purpose to direct the breath to the mid-back for mid-thoracic mobility. So, and again, this is just my methodology. This is the way that I've choreograph the breath to maximize core and to maximize mid-thoracic mobility and lung capacity and all the things. Again, I'm not saying that this is the only way. This is just the way that I've choreographed this for success with my clients. Now, with the exhale, we have a high contraction in the anterior core, those front muscles, those obliques, the transversus abdominis, all the things. So when I take an inhale, I'm directing my breath to the back. I'm still getting a really big inhale. Now, does the pelvic floor contraction limit the diaphragmatic movement in the front a bit? Yes, it does. And I'm doing this on purpose. I'm doing this to laterally expand the ribs and expand the ribs in the back with the inhalation. Okay, so we're getting that nice mid-thoracic mobility, but yet we're keeping a high integrity of contraction in the obliques and in the transversus abdominis in the front when we're doing our squat and our lunges. Now, then I cue a released inhale where I cue you to release that pelvic floor, and I cue you to open up your ribs and breathe into the ab ribbon so that you are getting a pelvic floor release after you get the pelvic floor contraction, because the release is just as important as the contraction. But in my opinion, we should stay a little more rigid when we're going through the functional movement pattern. Now, some have said that they have higher levels of incontinence when they squeeze their pelvic floor when they're doing functional movement patterns. And I do have a couple of questions for those folks. One, is there a chance that you're bracing and bearing down a little bit? Because the bearing down with a brace, even with a pelvic floor contraction, would encourage you to have incontinence, and it would stress the pelvic floor basket or the pelvic floor musculature a bit too much, and that would not be optimal. Now, I'm also coming from a postnatal perspective where I don't want you to bear down. In fact, the weight of the baby has been bearing down on the pelvic floor for almost a year, and so I want you to think zip up, lift up, gently loosen the ribbon around the waist. Be gentle with it. Be gentle with it, and not, don't be rigid, but rigid enough that you're highly training the core. You're training that deep core. You're loosening the ab ribbon, so you're thinking about your transversus abdominis while you're training, so you're getting everything synergistically at once. It's very important to me that we breathe into our back and breathe into our sides. This is that posterior breath and that side breath. When I see individuals when losing their pelvic floor contraction and losing their transversus abdominis contraction with training, I start to see movement in the pelvis or out of the neutral area. Neutral really now is being, for the most part, being defined as find your optimal positioning for your pelvis, and then don't let it move into anterior tilt or posterior tilt when you're performing your training. I do think that that's important, and I find that loosening the ribbon around the waist, getting a pelvic floor contraction, and hence getting a higher degree of a transversus abdominis contraction helps to stabilize the pelvis when you're going through those movements with heavier load, such as deadlift, squat, all of those things. And do I think it's important to also get a full inhale and let your diaphragm drop and let your pelvic floor drop? Absolutely. And I think there's a time and a place for that. And I do also include those in my workouts, just nasal breathing, full release, full contraction, full release. Work the whole pelvic floor spectrum. It's important. It really is important. Just as important to focus on relaxation as it is a contraction, right? And so I think that it's important to be able to do both. But I also think that there's a lot of value for many individuals to have the ability to get a full pelvic floor contraction. There are many who aren't able to and don't even have a connection to the pelvic floor. Kegels have been shown to be extremely successful in preventing and even recovering incontinence. And that is supported by decades of research. And so let's not poo-poo that research. And I know it's important, and it's fun, and it's also effective for certain individuals. For many individuals, there's many individuals who are going to have success with this. To push the envelope and move in the opposite direction, and and ask questions as to why we've been doing this for years. And I get that, and I think that there's value in that, and I think that we should continue to explore that. If you want to challenge your breath, your brain, and your body, please visit me at hypoxics.studio. That's where I do my live classes, and my on-demand is all there, where we do couple the breathing, the exhale with the pelvic floor contraction, and a full release of the pelvic floor in between our exercises. And in those classes, we're also training our carbon dioxide threshold. We're training mildly hypoxically over the course of 8 weeks to achieve positive adaptations on a physiological level, in conjunction with that musculoskeletal level of training the pelvic floor and training the deep core with all of our functional movement protocols. And on that note, getting a full exhalation and squeezing all the air out of the lungs is something that's going to help with your carbon dioxide tolerance. Now, if you get a full pelvic floor contraction, that's only going to help create higher levels of efficacy to be able to get to a full exhalation. So you can even also add in, and this is another point to the argument, a full pelvic floor contraction helps you to get to a full exhalation. Fully internally rotating the ribs, meaning dropping the ribs down, blowing the air out. Being able to endure that over time is going to help with that carbon dioxide tolerance, because carbon dioxide tolerance scores have been associated with stress levels. And we know that stress levels correlate with your longevity inversely proportionately. Then one can argue that being able to create a full pelvic floor contraction is going to equate to your longevity. So there you go. I don't know if anyone's ever made that argument before, but that's it. All right, pelvic floor, full contraction, full release. That's what we're talking about. I will see you guys at the next video.